Holly had asked you the other night about timeouts and how you take them to the game. I just wanted to know a little bit more about how your timeout philosophy has kind of changed over the years. I know you learned from Pop or Carlisle. Like, these guys are like some of the best at it. You learned from Pop, but where does that kind of come from, and just in how you take timeouts? Maybe how has that changed since maybe you were in Charlotte?
It's probably similar. I mean, I probably haven't changed a whole lot since Charlotte. I probably grew in my overall philosophy while I was there, and you try to let the guys figure it out, but I'm probably more nip it now and figure it out, which is more Pop style. But he didn't do it all the time, Sometimes he would let them figure it out, It wasn't always a quick one for him. So, yeah, just trying to figure out, where the team's at, and especially right now, just trying to nip some momentum and make sure we're all on the same page and we talk it out. And, we're learning on the fly too. We're learning in these timeouts. So I think it's important to take them and, talk through it and shift some momentum, maybe try to help them offensively. It's not always about drawing up a play too. That's part of it. A lot of our stuff right now is just more about our identity and making sure we got that covered.
Try to word this correctly. Before the Chicago game, you talked about the math of shooting threes as opposed to getting the better shot. Was that really what you wanted to see in the Chicago game as far as the balance goes, and not the sheer math of just taking threes?
It was. I thought, we had a nice balance of finding the rim and finding the open threes. That's the goal here. And we did it with pace. We did it with ball movement, sharing the ball. Spacing's important. The better space we are, the better decisions we make. We always talk about that. So making sure we're spaced correctly and we're moving it and we're sharing it. I was pleased with the quality of shot, the quality of ball movement last game, and Chicago plays that type of style too. I think you saw two teams kind of going back and forth on it. Obviously we dominated the paint, almost 80 points in the paint. I forgot the threes. What do we have, 35? But I think quality threes, and I think we had some high quality. We're obviously getting to the free throw line as well, so I see aggression there. Obviously the boards are a big thing. Tonight they'll challenge us a little bit more with their size on the glass. They're a bigger team, so we got to find other ways to manufacture good looks.
At the first game against Memphis, they did a good job of blocking shots. How do you try to overcome
Don't
that?
shoot it. Don't challenge them. Right? Like, be smart. You're down there. You can keep trying, but it's not a good look. And a lot of times that ends up almost like a turnover. Block shot, going the other way, dunk, layup. So you got to have what we call rim decision. It's rim decision night right here. You got two guys that are in the paint, clogging it up. We got to be willing to kick it, move them, play to the next side. So they'll challenge our rim decisions for sure. But it's an area that we've had to grow in all year. Nothing new tonight. Chicago probably was missing some of their size, so it allowed us to keep going to finish at the rim. Tonight may not be there as early or as often, so we're going to have to spray that thing.
Since he came back, his minutes has been around 30 minutes per game. Do you think that's where it'll be, at least for the foreseeable future? And is there a plan to kind of ramp up his minutes over time?
Yeah, I think the goal over time is, we'll probably move from there a little bit. You got to be cautious with him, where he's at. We got to get him. We got a long season ahead, so it's kind of that range. We're in that range right now, and then I'm sure it'll fluctuate, as we move forward. But the biggest thing, he's on the floor. He's healthy. He's feeling good.
I know you made a change out of the half and then the starting lineup last game. Should we expect to see any changes to start the game today?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I don't think so.
Fair enough.
No.
Today I heard Stan Van Gundy talk about how possessions have become sort of the currency in the league.
Possessions? Yeah.
And how teams are taking this trade-off where they're playing physical defense, where traditionally they've tried to avoid fouls, and now they're realizing turning teams over is I guess more profitable. Where do you sort of fall on that trade-off of trying to turn teams over versus not fouling a ton and getting them to the line?
I grew up, in the Spur model, we were more don't foul. We were very keep the hands out of the cookie jar, don't foul, make them finish, no free throws. I've probably gone the other way since my time in Charlotte, got more aggressive. I felt like in those teams, if you're on your heels all the time as a defense, unless you have a superior defensive group, it puts a lot of pressure on your defense to just not foul. You almost feel like you're on your heels defensively. I'd rather go be the aggressor. And, sometimes you're going to, swing and miss, but I think staying the aggressive team, turning teams over, I do value possessions. I think this is a team that fits that. This team has to win the board, has to win the turnover math game. And to do that, you got to be aggressive in your style defensively. Maybe someday we'll become more traditional and, we can just sometimes when you just have one big that can anchor the paint, it's a little bit different. But we got to swarm the ball. We've got to be aggressive. We're looking to turn teams over. We're active. We're trying to flip this thing. And I think, over the last 5 games, I think we're, I think top 5 or something, at least top 5 in turning teams over, somewhere in that range. And then the board's getting much better. So if you look at those 2 combinations, I think we're hitting the mark. We just got to keep going with it. Turnovers, limit our turnovers, which I think we can do, turn teams over, and then obviously win the glass. I think we're last 3 games top 2 defensive rebounding team. So progress.
Memphis is a team that's struggled a lot this year, but they've gotten recently a big piece back in Zach Edey. And it seems like when he's been on the court, he's been very impactful so far this year. So how does he affect your game plan?
Well, he's a problem defensively, and on the board. He's a problem. He just sits in that paint, and Jackson does the same thing. They're both just going to clog the paint tonight. They can rebound, but, we played against this group before. So we got to move them. We got to make them work on both ends. We got to go end to end with them, not let them just, mosey on back. If they're going to play with us, they have to play in transition. So that's our job, to outrun them, to move them side to side, and not just let them sit there in the paint, because they're big, they're massive. They're one of those, double big teams that can really hurt you in the paint.
Coach, you kind of touched on your time with Pop and at Charlotte. You had Tony Parker in Charlotte for a time, then you had LaMelo come in as a rookie. What have you taken from your time there with those 2 guys and brought to Jeremiah just to teach him on the court, connect off the court?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it, he and I. I think all 3 are really natural scorers. I think I've said that before. They've come in. That's what makes them great. That's why they're on the stage. Parker did it. LaMelo did it. Their instinct is to go score, get downhill, make plays. But there's a balance between, finding yours and playing within a system and making sure that you're playing, as a 5-man unit. And that's not always easy for a rookie. LaMelo struggled at times, and I had to correct that. And, it just took some time. But the goal is to find the best looks for the team, and Jeremiah's been great. He's open. He wants to be great. He works harder than anybody in that building. And, ultimately he's going to get there because his work ethic, his talent, his swagger, his confidence, all that. But there's some learning curves along the way, just like any rookie. It's not just Jeremiah, it's any rookie, and especially in the point guard spot. That's probably the toughest challenge. You're trying to manage a game, manage a team, and still live in your instinct as a basketball player. That's a lot to manage when you're 18 years old. This kid should be in college this year as a freshman. So, yeah, I saw Tony evolve into that. Tony, it took, a couple years with Pop, and Pop was on his tail day after day, game after game. He didn't finish every game. He didn't, sometimes he'd come out of the lineup, but there's a learning curve there for all these young rookies and young players. And LaMelo was, I love that process with him as well. It took time, game management. So nothing different. He's a wonderful kid, though, and he's a sponge, and he wants to get better and be great.
And seems like every comment here from you has been about competitiveness. You kind of lose track of the 2-way guys, or Micah that come in and does a lot of the defensive work. Just what can you say about how those guys come in, seize the opportunity? 2 ways go from G League, NBA. Some guys get discouraged, but how do they come in and help buoy the season and lift the competitive spirit?
They've been great. Every time those guys have stepped on the floor, they've impacted winning. They're making plays for us. They're physical. They're aggressive. They're playing within the team concept offensively. Every time they stepped on the floor, I think good things have happened. And their job is to stay ready. You never know when your number's going to get called in that role. Stay ready for your opportunity. And those guys have made the most of it.
It seems like a lot of times this season there's been some role players who are really good shooters, but not necessarily the focus of a game plan, that have gone to have big nights. Tonight they have a guy like Cam Spencer. So that's something that y'all have identified, and how do you maybe address that happening?
Well, you can't take away everything. It's unfortunate those guys have gotten hot. And for whatever reason, I can't explain it, but You know, if you go P.J. Washington, Watson, Moody, you know, it's those guys that have really dinged us. So I think within the game, we got to be able to adjust. Same thing. If those guys start to hit, I think we did it. Who was his name? Javon Carter the other night. You know, he comes on, dings us for 2 or 3 in the corner, and we nipped it right there, and we said we made an adjustment on him. We weren't perfect on him, but we made an adjustment. So you got to be ready. You can't make every guy that makes a shot hot. You know, you start running everybody off the floor. You're in constant scramble. So I think you go with a base, and then as a staff, as a team, we got to be ready to adjust because some guys just get hot, and when they see 2 or 3 go in, it's their night. We got to shut that water off. So we can be better in that area. Good. Thanks.